Hello, everybody. Today is Wednesday, and we are going over our session 5 called Pride and Selfishness in the Respectable Sins book written by Jerry Bridges. I'm going to pass it over to Lillian, and she's going to kind of give us a brief overview of these chapters, and then we're going to get into some discussion.
All right. So our key verse here for these two chapters is love is patient and kind. Love does not envy or boast. It is not arrogant or rude. It does not insist on its own way. And that's 1 Corinthians 13, 4 and 5. And this little section to go over these two chapters says, when we think of godly prayers, we certainly don't think of the self-righteous Pharisees' prayer in Luke 18:11. God, I thank you that I am not like other men, or even like this tax collector. After all, the Bible emphasizes that God hates sinful pride and opposes proud people. Ironically, each of us can develop a similar self righteous attitude. It is often easy to see sinful pride in others, but be blind to our own pride. That's why in this session, we'll look at 4 expressions of pride that especially tempt believers: the pride of moral self righteousness, pride of correct doctrine, pride of achievement, and pride of an independent spirit. Selfishness, the other respectable sin we'll explore, is also insidious and hard for us to recognize in ourselves. It crops up everywhere, even in the lives of theological heroes. We all have blind spots toward our selfishness. We are born with a sinful nature and are easily tempted to care more about our interests than those of other people. Though our selfishness may be crass and obvious, usually it is more delicate and refined because we care about what other people think. That's one reason we'll address not only selfish interests, but also being inconsiderate and selfish with time and money. Let's face our pride and selfishness, knowing that God will help us battle them and become more like Jesus.
Okay. Alrighty, thank you for that. We're going to get into some questions here. Our first question here is of pride, of self-righteousness. And it asks, what does Scripture say about sinful pride and the dangers that even believing teachers face? And then it gives some references to use, James 4:6 and 1 Peter 5:5. That's the ones I used. And with those combined, Scripture says God opposes the proud but gives grace to the humble. And some dangers that even believing teachers face can be hypocrisy, moral self-righteousness. An example of this is them preaching without practicing what they're preaching, basically. That's an example I gave.
Yeah, and on this one, I wrote that God will actively stand against the person who is prideful. He may not listen to the prayers of the prideful person, and he may not choose to bless that person with finances or fruitful and effective relationships with others and with God himself. God may intervene and put a stop to the prideful person's plans and endeavors. And as a spiritual leader, if we're talking about pastors and teachers, they're going to have a not growing and thriving relationship with God if they are constantly standing in this prideful arrogance towards God. And then they're not going to be effective because teachers and pastors are supposed to be shepherding the flock, the believers in the church. Mm-hmm. And they're not going to have good relationships with the church members and the people who attend if they are constantly having this prideful attitude. And God is not going to bless that church or those people because of the teacher's pride. And that's a dangerous place to be.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay.
Alrighty. Off to our next question. It kind of gave a little passage here for me to read. It starts, the sin of moral superiority and self-righteousness is so easy to fall into today, Jerry writes. When society as a whole is openly committing or condoning such flagrant sins as immorality, easy divorce, or homosexual lifestyle, abortion, because we don't commit those sins, we tend to feel morally superior and look with a certain amount of disdain or contempt on those who do. And the question along with this is, why do you suppose it is that we can be so easily drift into pride or moral superiority and then develop a spirit of contempt toward those who practice those sins? And what I said is, as people, we don't like the feeling of being uncomfortable with ourselves. So therefore, we try to neutralize our sins with finding context of justification or making ourselves feel better about it, usually by comparing ourselves with others. The other hand is judgment. Someone commits the same act out of sin to neutralize it. So we make it justifiable to judge that person. And that's just kind of something I thought of when answering this question.
Yeah. I agreed with his statement. I wrote, because we are not the ones doing these things, we feel as though we have a right to pronounce judgment. And for some foolish reason, we are taking on the responsibility of making a judgment on someone's character and heart.
Mm-hmm.
But this is reserved for God alone to do. We don't have that responsibility to judge someone based on what they do. We want to feel better about ourselves and possibly even use someone's obvious or loud sin to justify our own sin so we don't have to give it up.
Yeah, absolutely.
I think that's kind of something we like to do with these respectable sins. They're more quiet. They're more kind of just under the table.
Mm-hmm.
And if we can kind of focus on someone else's real obvious over the table sins, that's like, wow, that's like right in your face. Then it's like, well, if theirs is like that, then nobody's going to be paying attention to me and my attitudes and my behaviors. And I don't have to give up this sin that I want to do because I don't have to worry about it because they're kind of taking care of it.
Yeah.
And that's really so sinful because that's not taking responsibility for our own sin and, sin against God and what he wants us to do.
Yeah, absolutely. It kind of reminds me when you go back to society and like what people accept and don't accept,
Mhm.
we're falling right back into society standards. If
Right.
that seems worse to society than another sin,
Mm-hmm.
we justify it by, well, society doesn't see it as much as a sin as, another sin.
Right.
So it just kind of goes back to idling something we shouldn't.
Mm-hmm.
I wrote, I think we have a hard time extending grace to people.
Mm-hmm.
I think we forget so often the grace that we're given is without limits. And yet so often we place so many conditions on whether we're going to give grace or not. And I think the sins he's talking about here, I think we look at things from the outward where God looks at things from the heart. And I think sometimes we misinterpret some of the outward situations, not understanding or even being able to relate what actually is going on that, what's actually occurring in that person's heart, in their life.
Mm-hmm.
Because for the most part, we're not going to take the time to find out. We're in a immediate gratification society, and we don't really want to spend time with others that we see their faults.
Right.
And yet we don't see what actually is occurring in their life.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Alrighty. Off to our next question. It asks, where does our ability to achieve or succeed come from? And I just put simply our ability to achieve or succeed.
Sorry about that.
No, technical difficulties. Our ability to achieve or succeed was solely given to us by God. We tend to act like we're self-made and self-efficient by taking credit for the abilities and achievements that we have. However, the main point here is that we don't own or have anything because it's all given to us. That's where I think a lot of people get mixed up, is we believe that we created these ourselves, or we created these skills by ourselves, but everything we have is all given.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Well, and we reward this concept of self-made man.
Mm-hmm.
We see it in the corporate world all the time, how someone moved from working in the mailroom to president of a major corporation. And we admire that determination. And if you're around it enough, you start to believe that you've created those skills and those abilities until they're taken away,
Mm-hmm.
because they can be taken away.
Yeah, absolutely.
I mean, it's one thing to use them to honor God, but there's been so many times that it becomes such a self-serving practice that God can actually remove those skills and abilities from you.
Mm-hmm.
Alrighty. Next question.
I didn't have that question, guys. But basically, my answer would have been the same as you guys.
All right. Our next question is, how does God feel about a proud heart? How does he feel about our failure to acknowledge his gracious blessings? God, he has absolute rejection of pride and arrogance. That's just, it's well known if you are familiar with just the Bible in general. When we show pride, we're trying to take credit from the Father, which is dishonoring to him. And it even hurts him to acknowledge that we feel prideful over his blessings. And that's the main point is God, he's not going to be angry, but more maybe disappointed or hurt by your actions of pridefulness, because it's basically going into his face and saying that you are better than him, and he feels that, and it's very dishonoring to him.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, we read earlier, or there's a verse in James that he stands against the prideful, and yeah, like you said, it goes against his character. And if we're acknowledging from question 4 about our abilities and success and blessings, if we're not acknowledging that those come from him and we didn't do anything to get those or earn those were a blessing and a gift to us, and then we go and we take what he's given us that's actually not our own, like our bodies are not our own, they're God's. If we take that and say, okay, well, I'm going to run with this, God, and leave you behind, that's completely rejecting him, saying, I don't need you. I'm going to take what you've given me and I'm going to leave you because I feel like I have what I need and I'm self-sufficient. I can provide for myself. But that's not the kind of God that he is to us. He doesn't just give us stuff and then leave. He's actually pursuing us and he walks with us daily and consistently. And he wants that relationship, because everything he does is to glorify himself and then have that relationship with us, with his creation. Like I think it's the New Testament, it talks about, one of the authors talks about how we're the clay and God is the potter. He can do whatever he wants with us, and he wants to mold us and shape us into the image of Jesus. But if we're running away from him with these abilities he's given us, that is not what he wants us to do. He wants us to be with him and drawing close to him.
Yeah.
Have either of you ever gone through an interview where you had to tell the interviewer how good you were?
Oh my word. Yes, I hate those.
Mm-hmm.
Do not like those interviews.
Yeah, I think about that because it's like you're there and basically you're taking the credit for accomplishments you've done.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
And very seldom are you going to give any credence to God at all.
Mm-hmm.
You know, basically that's what resumes do.
Yeah.
They strip away. No, they don't strip away.
They highlight you.
They highlight you, and you don't have any right to take credit for any of it.
Mm-hmm.
When I came to Proverbs, one of my favorite verses, I guess because it applies to me far too often here, is out of Proverbs 6, verses 16 through 19. And it says, these are 6 things that God hates, and 7 that are detestable to him. And number one is haughty eyes. Well, haughty eyes, if you look at the definition of it, is a proud spirit.
Mhm.
And I think sometimes we don't think enough about Scripture. I don't think we think enough about consequences for our behavior, knowing it is so dishonoring to God. And I think part of it is we've just become numb to our self-serving life. I mean, our old nature just seems to continue to rise,
Mhm.
even when we maybe aren't even conscious of it. But I always look at this passage because I think there's a lot of things in here, but the number one was haughty eyes.
Mm-hmm.
And I guess we just read it sometimes and just bypass it. Because the pride, the self-righteousness,
Mm-hmm.
found myself today having a discussion. And as soon as I got done, I realized it was probably prideful for some of the things I said.
Our pastor.
They may have been accurate. It may have been accurate, but it's not always if you're right. It's, was it good to be right? Sometimes we can prove our point, but did we need to prove our point?
Right.
Mm-hmm.
But arrogance.
Yeah.
Arrogance and pride, at least for some of us.
It kind of sounds like Paul when he says all things are lawful, but not all things are helpful. So it's like we have the ability to speak pridefully and do prideful things, but it's not helpful and it's not glorifying to God. So it's like,
So that's why it's a sin.
yeah,
Mm-hmm.
anything contrary to God is sin. Our pastor was doing a sermon series, and one of the things he talked about was pride on this certain one. And after that sermon, I was like, oh my word, I don't know if I can say anything. I don't know if I should even open my mouth ever again.
Well, how do you take it a compliment?
Yeah, and I was thinking about that too. It's like, how do I even respond to anything? Because this pride is so. I told them before we started this that we're plagued with pride. Like it's worse than like an epidemic. Like it's way worse than COVID. 100%. This is like so deeply ingrained in us. And I was like, every single conversation I have with someone or someone has with me, and we're just discussing in any sphere of life or influence, I'm like, it's all pride. It's prideful. Every single thing that I could think of was prideful. And I was like, oh my word, Lord, how do I even open my mouth? I don't know how to speak anymore. It's almost like having to relearn how to speak, like how to communicate. Because we're so used to talking about ourselves and so used to inflating ourselves and building up our ego and making ourselves feel better and putting the focus on us. We've been ingrained with that. And it's like God's word is just so opposite to that. So the more you read the Bible, the more it's like, oh my, this is like a total revamp. This is like demolition and rebuilding. Like this is not just a facelift. This is like complete destruction and rebuilding. It's a really intense process.
Yeah.
Because it's a process.
Yeah, it doesn't take. It doesn't
And
just
there are
go.
times we're much more conscientious about it and much more aware of where we are. But I think we become so complacent. I know one of the first books we went through that dealt with selflessness. We went through that study, and for like a month and a half, 2 months, I thought, how do you even respond to a compliment? It's like you don't even want to hear them. You don't even want to be in a situation where someone compliments you.
Yeah.
Because soon after that, someone said something to me, and I literally couldn't respond because I didn't know how to respond. I mean, because I guess it's just thank you. I guess that's the response, thank you. But
But it's like, can we say that in a humble attitude in our hearts? Because you
Oh,
can say,
certainly.
because you can say things.
Certainly we can.
I recently.
It gets back to motive. It's a motive issue. And we're so inclined to elevate ourselves because we live in a culture where people look upon successful people. And all of us want to be successful. I mean, you don't want to be, you want to be successful. And a lot of times we embellish our success because we know that's going to impress people.
And
You know,
we'll
you
feel
go to
better.
a party or you go to a convention, those conventions are the ones I always think of, because everyone's just nothing more than building themselves up on how great their programs are, how great their ministries are. And it's nauseating to me. It's nauseating because it's not even true in most cases. If you went and you visited those organizations, it wouldn't be there.
Mhm.
It's kind of like what we do with annual reports.
Mm. And I think also, it, like you said, it's nauseating. It's almost becoming offensive now. Like the more I'm reading the Bible and the more that we're studying this pride, and the more it's like, oh my gosh, this is a mirror into my own life. Oh my word, this is crazy. It's almost becoming offensive. Like I'm offended for God when people are boasting about themselves, or just it is sickening. But
But isn't that a form of pride?
well, I think it can be, but I think it becomes a form of pride when you start thinking you're not that way. So I feel like if you
Well,
can,
that's because you take the mirror down, so you don't.
no,
have to
you
look.
got to keep the mirror up. There has to be a perpetual mirror to keep.
But we don't want the mirror. We want it taken down.
I know.
So we look at ourselves in a vein that's not honest. It's not even representative to us.
Yeah,
I know it's a mess.
it is.
Or messes.
It is kind of a mess, but it's like every day. It's like we have a new opportunity to give God the glory and God the praise for something, and so, and I mean, I write those down. I try to. That way, it's out of my head then, and I know, and I can look back and see, okay, this was God that did this. It was not me, and then it goes away, and I don't have to deal with it anymore because it's out of my head now.
I think it's just, and through all these books, and we've gone through the last 6-7 months, I'm not sure how long it's been. But it's like if there's one thing that's kind of pinpointed, that stuck with me, it's can you extend grace to even a dimension of what grace we're receiving from Christ? Because I think when I can extend grace, it kind of diffuses my attitude and my assessment of the individual.
Absolutely.
Yep.
Do you have any thoughts, Alexis? Any extra thoughts?
I
Any
do
thoughts on
not.
pride?
You guys got all the thoughts out.
Oh, we could talk for hours on this.
I know, it's so easy to. But our next question that we do have,
But knowledge,
knowledge is not power.
Oh, what? Oh, it's not power. What am I doing here?
I shouldn't have said it, but it's a nice
Anywho,
Anywho,
our next question, it asks, which biblical principles help us guard against a sinful desire for personal recognition? And I don't have a very long answer for this one, but it's just really refocusing your heart on the true humility and have submission to God's supreme authority. And I think the most helpful thing out of all of this, because it is a process, you're not going to wake up overnight and be a completely different person. But if we stay in communication and in connection with the Lord, it shouldn't be much of a challenge at all. I'm not saying it's going to be super easy, but if we stay accountable to our slip-ups and our mistakes and our sinful behaviors, and not just be accountable, but make sure that we are cleaning it up and we're continuing to try and honor the Lord as much as possible. is probably one of the main ways to help us guard against that kind of sinful desire for pride.
I wrote down humbly recognizing any ability we possess to do anything is given from God alone, responsibly fulfilling tasks to the best of our God-given ability, and taking no credit or accolades for accomplishments or achievements or anything. And I did write, if thanked, like for whatever, if someone acknowledges something that you've done, or acknowledge something that I've done, then I want to respond with words that glorify God. And a lot of times I've just been saying, well, praise God. Like, I don't even try to say thank you anymore because, I mean, I guess that isn't an appropriate response, but I just want it all to go to God. Like, I don't want it to be that I'm building myself up. Because God has the authority and ability to lift up his people and put them down. He is sovereign. And I think we really need to focus on resting in his sovereignty, that with whatever he has deemed appropriate for us to do in a day, whatever job it is, whatever school it is, whatever situation it is, he is sovereign and he's chosen to put us in that situation. So I know in the book he talked about different tasks that are, and if you don't get thanked for it, like how do you respond to that? And it's like, if we are resting in God's sovereignty, then we can trust that he's seeing what we're doing and we're doing it for him alone, not for man to look at and make us feel better, but that this is what God's appointed for me to do today, and humbly recognizing this is a gift to be able to serve him today with this specific task, whether or not anyone sees me.
There's a verse that, I got a lot of different verses that apply to me, but this one is really kind of interesting. Out of Galatians 1:10, it says, "For am I now seeking the approval of man or of God? Or am I trying to please man? For if I'm still trying to please man, I will not be a servant of Christ." And it's a very convicting verse, but it's also has some significant eternal value. And yet, in all honesty, in 60 plus years of going to church, I've never been in a church that doesn't pride themselves or is not trying to compete against a fellow church. They might not outwardly say it, but the motive is there. And I think that's what's sad, is because we adopt so much from being in church. And I don't know how often we actually discern what really is going on in the church. Because like I said, I've been to 50, 60 different churches in my lifetime. And I've never been to one that I've ever experienced true humility. It's more, we have to prove ourselves. And I don't know who we're proving ourselves to. But I think a lot of times we're trying to prove it to the community in which we live in, that we are slightly more advanced than some of the other churches in that community. And we're going to get into this later, but it deals with doctrine, which I still think is very convicting.
Yeah, absolutely. Alrighty, off to our next question. Our next question is under selfishness, and it asks, what is the root of our selfishness? And what I wrote is, the root of our selfishness lies in our temptation and sin itself. And if we think about it, this is because this is due to the fact that we're not tempted to be sinful for others' desires but our own. It kind of reminds me when kind of back in like maybe early high school, maybe in the middle school area, where you're trying to find that kind of friend group and you don't know where you're fitting in, and you find a group of people and they may be acting or behaving in a certain way that's out of your normal or comfort zone, or doing things that are your comfort zone, but you start entertaining that not because they want you to, but because you want to fit in. You have that desire to fit in. Um, or even like if you go to, say, a scenario where you go to a place where everyone's drinking and that's not something you want to do. It's not the other's desires that you start drinking, but your own. So because you desire to fit in. That's just something I kind of came off on the top of my head. But yeah, the root of our selfishness is our own temptation and our own desire.
I agree. And Genesis tells us that very well, that it was because the fruit looked good and it was a pretend idea of control and of wanting to do your own thing apart from God. And it was a desire to be prideful and desire to raise yourself up above God. I wrote my desire for complete autonomy and control. I don't want anyone or anything stopping me from what I want to have or want to do. I want my decisions to be final and correct. I want to be unchallenged. We want power. We want to be our own God. And they put some verses in here, and just some of the stuff from these verses. One of them talks about the heart is deceitfully wicked above all else, dealing treacherously with God, betraying him, the sin which Paul talks about, the sin which dwells in us, having a mind that's set on the flesh, desires of the flesh, anything evil within, and we're children of wrath because of the sin curse that we're under. That is why we're selfish, because we have an innate desire to be autonomous, to have nothing controlling us and nothing telling us what to do.
Yep, absolutely.
It's called me.
There you go.
That's the answer. Me.
Mm-hmm.
There's a passage, and I think it's in this chapter of this book. I'm not sure. I can't go to it right now because I'm 200 pages away from it. But he talks about a priest, and they got into the topic of sin. And the priest said, "It's me that put Christ on the cross."
Oh, yeah.
And
Mm-hmm.
how often do we even think of that?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, if there had been nobody else in the world but me, I put him on the cross.
Mm-hmm.
But the glorious thing is, he would have died for me regardless.
Yeah.
So that's my answer.
Okay. Well, I got another question for you. But this question's also under selfishness. Which phrase in 2 Timothy 3:1-2 describes a selfish person? Why is it so convincing? Timothy 3:1-2 describes a selfish person as a lover of self. This later translates into a destructive behavior, which relates to pride, arrogance, greed. Also, it's a corruption to worshiping the Father. It directs to self-love and personal desires, while the Lord isn't the center anymore.
Yeah, that whole section, like you said, it starts with lovers of self. And it actually says lovers of self, lovers of money, boastful, arrogant, revilers, disobedient to parents, ungrateful, unholy, and there's a lot of other ones too, but they just stop there. And this is convicting, because when you actually read through this, you would think, oh, I'm not a reviler, I'm not a boastful person or a lover of money. But when it comes down to what I value and what's important, you can see what I value by what I buy, what I invest my time in, what I invest my resources in. And it's convicting, because once you start reading through all this, it's like, oh, wow, I am all these things, maybe on a smaller scale, maybe not so obviously, but each of us have these issues, and each of us struggle with these issues of loving things other than God and with idolatry.
Yeah, I think in looking at this scripture, I think we need to go a little further than this. Because he does talk about lovers of self, lovers of money, boastful, all that. But if we go to verse 5, which is a summary of 1 through 4, is having a form of godliness, but denying its power, have nothing to do with such people. And if you read that as it is, you would have no business dealing with yourself
Mm-hmm.
because that's who we are.
Yeah.
And we can't get away of ourselves. Next question.
Okay. Alrighty. We are on the next.
All right, we're on the talk it over section, which we have been doing, but we're going to keep talking it over. Our first question, do you agree with the author that there are degrees of selfishness as well as degrees of subtlety in expressing it? Why or why not? And yes, I agree with this statement. Selfishness has its many layers, and like I've said before, some expressions are more obvious than others, but each expression is connected to the other. If one expression is loud and obnoxious, such as a deliberate attempt to take what does not belong to you, it is evidence of a heart that's envious and self-seeking.
Mm-hmm.
Jerry quotes, obvious acts of selfishness are socially unacceptable, so the selfish acts become more subtle, but the problem is still there. And he was referencing a child and a mother saying, hey, it's not okay to take that toy from someone else, being selfish. So then this child understands, oh, so I can't be selfish in public. But the mother doesn't address the child's actual inner problem is that he is selfish.
Mm-hmm.
And that it needs to be a heart change, not just a outward change. It needs to be an inner change first.
Absolutely. All right. Yeah, I like that answer. Something I said, I agreed absolutely. The degrees of selfishness can be displayed as loud and obnoxious, while in other cases it can be displayed as more passive and more reserved. This could include avoiding a shared responsibility. And with subtlety, it can be displayed as acting on good deeds or for personal reward, or even pivoting a conversation so you can share your own story. That's like sitting there and not actually listening to the person. You can't wait to get on your part. And defensiveness of one's ego, where if anyone tries to not necessarily correct you, I mean, it does fall into that sometimes, but someone's adding an idea or sharing an idea and it makes you defensive because you may feel like that person's trying to override your opinion and your idea. Those are a few examples that I have of these two.
Yes, and I don't have anything to add.
Okay. All right. Why does God hate sinful pride? How does it minimize his work in our lives? I wrote that it's a rejection of himself, a rejection of his love, his care, provision, guidance, direction, and the gift of salvation. It minimizes his work in us because when we lift ourselves up, God is not put on display, and an unbelieving world only sees us in our sinful flesh. We are ineffective for Christ in our own personal growth and sanctification.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Something I wrote was God hates pride because it robs him of his glory. If you truly believe in your prideful behavior, God won't walk away, but he will step back and he will allow you to control what usually causes one's pride to have natural consequences. This can result in a realization that you aren't as important as you may think and that God is. Sometimes he allows you to naturally face consequences to kind of turn you towards the truth. Because a lot of the time when we're prideful, we don't want to listen to what you have to say because we know the answers already. It's just kind of how the prideful mind works, just depending on the kind of level of pride you may have. But pride is pride nonetheless. So, yeah, sometimes, he's always there, but he will step back because you have your fleshly will. You can go and you have free will to do anything, even though that may not be the plan and that may not be you being righteous to God. But that's what you'll do sometimes, is you'll just step back and let things run its course a little.
I think for most of us, the sin of pride has become so habitual that it ends up being, we end up not hearing the voice of God. And when we no longer, when we become that calloused and we no longer are able to hear his voice, we put ourselves in just a very precarious situation in terms of automatically seeking our own desires rather than his desires. But because we've been doing it so long, we've become numb and calloused to the Spirit talking to us. I mean, it's like the ultimate form of arrogance.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely.
All right. We have one more question in this section. Why is it sometimes difficult to focus on and listen to other people's interest areas rather than talking about our own? How do our selfish tendencies influence our conversations, our activities, or our thoughts?
Well, that's an easy one because we think so much highly of ourselves than the person, than the person that's telling the story.
I see.
We're more important.
Right.
That's a bit of sarcasm, but that's really what it becomes.
Yeah. No, you're right.
We like to exalt ourselves because our opinion is going to carry more weight than their opinion.
Right.
And you find this in families that are full of type A personalities and stubbornness. And I'm speaking from experience here, where everyone's opinion is almost of less value than yours, but then the next person's opinion gains more traction than yours. So you end up never having a healthy.
You're like battling for the best opinion in the room.
Yeah, and I also believe some of it is personality. I mean, we all have different personality traits, and it's not an excuse. I mean, we're born with different personalities. And I think there's some that are just, I mean, if we look at the disciples, there were certain disciples that were much more forceful than other disciples. And they had to make sure their voice was heard. And I think it's no different than that now. And who wants to be considered less important?
Right.
I mean, maybe you guys do.
I wrote down, we have lived so long with a mindset that life is about me. We are preconditioned to think that my comfort, my desires, my abilities are the primary goals of life. How can I protect myself? I don't know what that word says. Provide for myself and be the best of me I can be. It takes work and effort to put others first above what I want. It takes sacrifice and energy. And I wrote, deep in our souls, we want recognition and praise. We want to be noticed. Oh, and then it said, how do selfish tendencies influence our conversations, our activities, and our thoughts? And I said, monologues, listening only to respond, and manipulation. I think there's so many things at times and situations I can think of that I have been this way, and then other people have been this way to me, where it's just it's a one-person conversation. This person just talks and talks and talks and talks and talks. And I've been there where I'm the one who's doing that. And I'm like, oh my word. I didn't even ask them what's going on in their life. I just shared my stuff. And I've really struggled with listening only to respond. That's been very prevalent in my family. That it's like you only listen enough to get the information you need to either defend yourself or get at that other person.
Yeah.
or to make yourself feel better against their opinion or whatever they're thinking.
Mhm.
It's like I'm only listening enough to get enough information and traction to build up myself, rather than listening to actually understand the person, where they're coming from, and come to a good like agreement or discussion or whatever it is. That's been hard.
Yeah, that's definitely something I struggle with in my family as well. We are all type A, trying to, everyone's right in the family. That's just how it goes. But I think since we only live in our own perspectives, it can be difficult to have interests in other person or other people. Our brains can concur that our thoughts are more stimulating. Sometimes we can sit and wait for another person to be done just so we can talk. That's something you just mentioned, without actually listening to the other person. And sometimes it's calculated, especially in arguments, just like how you mentioned. Or you feel like someone's trying to come at you, or you just automatically get defensive. You start calculating how to get back at them or how to respond in a different way.
Okay, I think we're gonna end there because we're at 45 minutes and we had a lot of talking today. So we're not gonna get to our last 3 questions, but that's okay.
Yes, it's been a minute since we've been on here and actually been able
Yes.
to talk all 3 together. So
Yes,
we definitely need to get things out.
for sure.
But all right, yes, today was Wednesday's video, our podcast on Respectable Sins. We will be back next week on Monday, Tuesday, and I believe and Wednesday. No, it's just Monday, Tuesday. Pardon me, it's just Monday and Tuesday. The rest of the week we will not have any podcast. I hope you could have taken something about pride or selfishness and applied it to yourself, and in a positive manner, or learned something about yourself, because we know we sure did. And I appreciate you guys for listening today.